My name is Judah McNeil, and I'm sitting here with Ford Suze, and we're going to talk about Ender's Game, one of my favorite sci-fi series books. Ender's Game itself, the best book I've ever read as far as sci-fi goes.
Yeah, I don't have anything bad to say about it. I think it has some interesting ideas, and like the best science fiction, it paints this picture of the future that it turns out to be prophetic. I mean, there's certain things in there that were just, he was seeing it happen before it was really happening. You know, maybe he was observing some things that were going on and with computers, but I mean, the stuff about the basically blogs that the brother sister have that changed the world. You know, that bloggers would have that big of an impact. I mean, that's pretty prophetic.
One of the most beautiful themes of the book is looking at innocence versus power. How do you remain innocent when you and yet still use power, still influence?
Right.
And I think maneuver is the word that comes to my mind, instead of, like, I often use the word manipulate, right? Like,
right.
But that has such a bad connotations. I think the word maneuver explains better how to use power,
right,
without being a tyrant, without being a sadistic person.
An idealist does not really stop wars. You know, the war marches on, whether there's, a picketer on the side or not. You know, if India had turned into a pacifist, that wouldn't have stopped the war. What's it, Hemingway? Hemingway wrote this book about war, and he said basically, it would be, in a perfect world, there would be no war. But when it comes to war, it's the job of the soldier to try to finish it as quickly as possible, losing as little life as possible. You know, the way he handles himself in a lot of the training exercises is a good example of that, just that maneuvering. And then not only that, but when he comes to fuller understanding what's actually going on, his response to that, rather than doubling down and saying, trying to reinterpret the universe to align with what he did, he takes responsibility for what he did.
The Bugger War, and he asked him, why do you think we're in this war? And he said, it's basically, Ender interprets it to say, so we're at war because we can't communicate. And he says, basically, yes. And I thought that was very interesting. The idea, because the buggers are completely psychic. They can't talk through machine or mouth. Right. And so the whole war was over this inability to communicate.
Yeah, that's a fascinating commentary. And, I feel like, that the more that I engage with India, for instance, or Indians in particular, from India, the more I just realize how difficult it is just for human beings who have very different histories, very different arrays of cultures, not just culture or cultures, but arrays of cultures that kind of communicate within their own ecosystem. We get these two ecosystems together. They have a very hard time. We have a very hard time communicating. And so war, whether it be ideological or literal, physical, seems to be the first recourse for human nature. It's just that fear. Fear drives you to that next level because you just don't know what's in the other person's mind.
Yeah. There's a conversation that Ender has with his sister Valentine about, oh, you're just trying to manipulate me. You're just, everybody wants to have power. You're using their power against me. And she says, instead of saying no, she says, we're human, and welcome. I think she says, welcome to the human race. That's what it means. I don't think she said that's what it means to be human, but that's a part of being human, is deciding how to use the power that we've been given.
Right.
And so when it comes to maneuvering and game, like you're saying, playing games, and one thing that came to my mind real quickly is, as men, where do we have the ability to maneuver? Where are we allowed? I think that's when I feel that I'm most useful, is when I'm maneuvering, but I don't often feel useful because we don't have a lot of arenas to maneuver.
Right.
To to execute, our influence on a situation.
4 places. So, military, sports, crime, either side of the crime game, or the entrepreneurial world. And so I think most men probably end up going into the business world, but the business world has become very political, and I would not say that it's so easy to apply like maneuvering strategies to a lot of what has become business, because you have to think, you have to play 5D chess all the time.
Yeah.
Because you're not just you're thinking about legal, you're thinking about accounting, you're thinking about politics, you're thinking about speech, so there's just so many things that is kind of, whereas in military, that's a different kind of maneuvering, I feel like, and military crime and sports, they're different kinds of maneuverings. You know what the general rules are. There are tactics, there are goals, there are objectives to be won, right?
That's the key there. Tactics and goals. I've had many bosses over me in my life, and what I found is a astonishing lack of tactics and goals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where you have people that are just meeting benchmarks, surviving, basically just collecting a paycheck and doing, like not playing chess, just playing checkers, just, moving your guys ahead.
Yeah, it's not even checkers. It's snakes and ladders. I mean, I would say it's just this game of chance, Candyland. It's Candyland, snakes and ladders, and that's true. And all my experiences with NGOs, with the church, with businesses, it's the same with the education system.
Yeah, sure.
It's just moving numbers around. Like, it's not actually math. It's manipulative statistics. It's just moving things around to make it look like things are happening. Yeah. So it's not maneuvering, it's manipulation.
There needs to be more of a place, especially for young men, and I think our age, where we are able to use our God-given intelligence. It takes intelligence to maneuver. And right. I feel my brain atrophying in this society.
The lack of risk, the lack of challenge, and that's why I think, there's whole sections of male society that just never ever reach that, if they don't go to the military, or into crime, like or sports to some degree too, like those 3 areas, because you're like the corporate world, the business world, it's almost like the game is already set. People have decided no, we're not going to let you move. And so, you have to really go to the boundaries. So which requires a ton of intelligence or just, a maverick spirit, which is just, which is daunting. And that's the thing about the military. It's not about maverick spirit. It's about, you need mentors. You need people who are going to tell you, yeah, you can walk, that 100-mile march and you're going to survive, because if you get, 20 miles into it, you're like, oh, forget this. This is impossible, because you need somebody to bring you that extra mile. And so, Ender's able to get there because of a structure of challenge and risk and pushing forward.
And older mentors above him pushing him.
Right.
Putting him in situations and believing in him, really.
Right.
Both of us have kids. Real quick, what are your thoughts on sports?
I think that they've been supplanted by video games. Video games are just so much more complex, and even though they're not realistic in a physical way, that will change soon with virtual reality. They're much more realistic in a tactical way. You think about all major sports that we play, they're, bat and ball games or ball and boundary games, and they're avoiding what we're really talking about. We're talking about war here. Okay. Like, let's quit acting like it's anything else. Like football, I think, is maybe one of the most football and rugby are maybe the closest approximations, because there's actually bodily contact. But, MMA is probably as close as you're going to get. Like, so what we really need is like some sort of like Dota 2 or StarCraft or League of Legends inspired version of MMA, where you have 2 teams of, 5 that, beat each other up, and
let me tell you,
in a tactical way.
I think that is the future of video games, adding stakes to a game like Dota. And I think eventually I think the future is really robots fighting and people with, video game controllers behind them.
Yeah. And I think, and it needs to be an equitable fight. And so what we're going to have eventually is conflict resolution. And then instead of dealing with lawyers, who become our battlers, we actually have people either, it could be one of two ways. It could be like Dota or League of Legends, where you get your best 5 players and we get our best 5 players. And, in order to do that, it needs to be like the blockchain. It needs to be like Bitcoin. It needs to be this comprehensively, uniformly accountable ledger, that there's no arbitrating committee. Like the math is doing the arbitration. There is no dispute. And so the technology is not quite there for video games yet, because, even in these Dota or League tournaments, there's usually a pause. There's usually some malfunction, like you can't have malfunctions or pauses when, $1 million is on the line or something like that. And that was the whole thing, with Ender's Game. You think about the old men, they were great tacticians. They were great mentors in terms of military theory, but they weren't so great. They were terrible at cross-cultural communication.
Yes.
And, I think we are at a time where we have to be Ender at the end of that book. And in the next book, where it's just rigorously going to the ends of the earth for true understanding, and that's going to require such work, and you can't depend on the government to do it, because the government, their whole game is protection. It's protectionism, and we're in a post-protectionism world. And, I think, a lot of these innovations are going to start changing this, where it's not going to be the government that's going to be able to do it.
I think the ability to be able to talk to you, Ford, and talk about these things, I think it's helpful for me. And I think it's I'd like to invite more people into it, as we, whether that be questions and answers, or if we actually invite, other people to weigh in on some of these pieces that we talk about.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, I've got to go. And I think the thing we can take forward is what, in the world of maneuvering, right? Well, in a world of manipulation, we can be maneuverers and look at look at communication as the
right.
key.
Yeah, try to reduce damage in the manipulations of the world. Try to maneuver through the manipulative games, and then really see if there's something more fundamental. Like, is there a way to get these two sides to communicate and maybe avert a crisis that doesn't need to be, there? Maybe we're on the same side. We don't even realize it. And I think, that's what the book is really kind of getting at.
Yeah. All right. Well, continue to create your own. What was it?
Make your own myth.
Make your own myth. And remember that the enemy base is down.
All right. Sounds good.